Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer, and today, as part of my B-Tier guides for Dragon Age Origins Awakening, I'm going to take you through the build I recommend for Sigrun. Sigrun is my favorite companion in Awakening, so of course I started my build series for Awakening with her. Before we get into the build, I'll take a moment to say a special thank you to my members. I appreciate all of you so much, and your support allows me to keep going. Joining as a member would help the channel a lot, but of course only do so if you want to and if you can afford it. I am always grateful, even if you just like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment. Back to the guide. First, I have a few mods I recommend. Most important, in both Origins and Awakening, Dane's Fixes. It resolves a lot of bugs related to combat and implements missing item properties. It has some pretty nice quality of life and balance adjustments too, and the best part about Dane's Fixes is that it's completely modular, so you can only copy the parts of it you want and ignore the rest. If you use Dane's Fixes, then I also recommend more detailed tooltips because it will show you the detailed descriptions for all the abilities in the game, as well as clearer numbers for item properties. There is one more mod I recommend that would be very useful for combat, Advanced Tactics. This fixes a lot of issues with follower AI and implements a bunch more options to choose from in the tactics menu. You also get the option to enable melee rogues to attack enemies from behind so they can backstab more often even without you needing to micromanage them. You can find this option in your Warden skill menu. This option in particular is the main reason I am mentioning this mod because Sigrun's build is focused on backstabs. If you would like to be able to let her do her own thing by just setting up her tactics, it's best if you have this mod so that she will position herself better for backstabs. If you don't have this mod, you'll have to focus as much as you can on the effect of the coup de grace talent, which allows the rogue to backstab enemies that are stunned, paralyzed, frozen, or petrified, regardless of the rogue's position. And finally, I would also recommend the Respecification DAO mod that lets you respecialize your Warden and companions. However, in Awakening you get access to a special item called Tome of Focus that you can buy, which does the same thing. There are still two reasons I recommend using Respecification DAO for. One, if you want to respecialize your Warden from Origins before you import them into Awakening, in case you feel their build is not very good, especially in terms of being able to get through the first mission of the game with it. This is because Tomes of Focus will only be available after you complete the first mission. The other reason is that with the mod, you can choose to only partially respecialize a character, which means they get to keep their own specializations unlocked. This would be more important if you haven't yet played through Awakening because you won't have the new specializations unlocked, and if you use a Tome of Focus, you won't be able to choose that companion starting specialization until you unlock it for yourself by buying the corresponding manual from a merchant. With that out of the way, let's get into Sigrun's build. This will be a dual-wielding build focused on dealing huge damage with backstabs, while also being tankier than a regular rogue through the Legionnaire Scout specialization, wearing armor pieces with high armor and other good defensive stats, and a couple of great defensive talents. All of these things will keep Sigrun safe in case enemies start to attack her due to her high damage output. There are quite a few ways in which you can play a melee rogue, but I find that this backstab-focused version feels super satisfying and also fits Sigrun's aggressive nature. I did a ton of research and complicated calculations to figure out this build because I wanted to make something that feels different than the builds from Origins, so I hope you find this just as fun to play as I did when I tested it. When you recruit her, Sigrun has the following skills unlocked: maxed out combat training, poison making, combat tactics, and vitality. The maxed out combat training is great because it grants access to all tiers of weapon talents, plus it gives you various combat bonuses like plus 0.5 combat stamina regen, plus 6 attack, and plus 1 armor. Poison making is also a great pick for a rogue because they will benefit the most from poisons or coatings applied to their weapons due to their higher attack speed. Vitality is a nice pick for Sigrun in particular, who already has bonuses to her health from her Legionnaire Scout passive, Mark of the Legion, so the extra health from Vitality makes her tankier on top of that. Combat Tactics is fine, it just adds an extra tactics slot for Sigrun, slightly useful if you want a bit more to work with when you set up her tactics, but not necessary. Overall, Sigrun has great starting skills other than maybe replacing Combat Tactics with a rank of Clarity, or improved poison making in case you want to also craft yourself poisons and grenades, not just use the ones you buy or loot. Let's discuss Sigrun's starting abilities. First off, as a dwarf, she gets the Dwarven Resistance passive, which grants her 10% spell resistance. This is useful, but more so for a warrior who tends to get attacked more often and can't get rid of enemies so easily. Still, she gets this just because she's a dwarf, so it's a nice little bonus. From the rogue tree, she has Dirty Fighting, Below the Belt, Deadly Strike, lethality, and stealth. Dirty Fighting is great because it stuns an enemy and it can't be resisted. The duration is fairly short, only 4 seconds, and it's adjusted by enemy rank, so higher rank enemies won't be stunned for long. It may still be worth using against them, even if just for 1 extra backstab. Below the belt is a little kick attack with a +5 attack bonus that inflicts a penalty of -5 defense and 50% movement speed to the target unless it passes a physical resistance check against the rogue's cunning. This is more of a useful talent if your dexterity is very high because the damage scales with dex. The debuff on the enemy isn't relevant, and since this build is focused on backstabs, I don't recommend this. You do need this for the purpose of unlocking lethality for the crit chance bonus, but if you respecialize Sigrun, you can wait to get that later since it's not a high priority. Deadly Strike attacks the target with a +10 attack bonus, dealing maximum weapon damage and gaining +10 armor penetration for this strike. This attack can crit, but for the purpose of this build, it's better to use an auto-crit ability, an ability that causes multiple quick strikes, or something that deals damage in an area. Once again, it's needed to unlock lethality, but if you respec Sigrun, you don't need to rush to lethality since its passive crit chance bonus is nice, but not necessary. Lethality is a passive that grants +10% melee crit chance. It also allows the rogue to use their cunning score as a damage modifier for weapons instead of strength if their cunning score is higher. However, this will not affect the strength requirements for weapons or armor, and also doesn't replace strength for its bonus to attack, aka chance to hit for melee weapons. In classic cunning-based rogue builds, you want to pick this up early so you can deal extra damage with your weapons based on your high cunning score, but since Sigrun's build is focusing on strength, the only reason you may want this is for the crit chance. You'll be doing mostly backstabs and using auto-crit talents or other high damaging abilities, so you don't really need crit chance. If you respecialize Sigrun, you can either keep lethality for later, or honestly skip it entirely together with Below the Belt and Deadly Strike. Stealth is a sustained that allows the rogue to fade from view and be untargetable, but perceptive enemies can break the rogue out of stealth. Plus, if the rogue takes any action other than movement while in stealth, including attacking or using items, stealth will break. The first attack you do while stealth is an automatic critical hit, or an automatic backstab if you are in the correct position to backstab. I personally don't bother with stealth most of the time because in order to use it properly, you have to max it out so that you can use items while sneaking without breaking stealth, very useful for throwing grenades at enemies, and also with the 3rd and 4th ranks, you'll be able to reinitiate stealth while you're in active combat, which can be useful for the purpose of getting away from an enemy or repositioning to backstab them. So this one single rank in stealth is not useful. If you want to do anything good with it, you'll need to get the other 3 ranks of it. From the dual weapon tree, Sigrun has the passive row maxed out, dual striking, riposte, dual weapon sweep, flurry, and momentum. When it comes to the dual weapon passives, for most melee rogues I recommend only unlocking the first 3, but Sigrun is a special case so all 4 passives are useful for her. Dual weapon training increases the attribute bonus the offhand weapon gets for damage, making it equal to the bonus the main hand weapon gets. Dual Weapon Finesse grants the character +5 attack and defense while dual wielding. Dual Weapon Expert grants +2.5% melee crit chance and also causes the character's attacks to deal bleeding damage over 5 seconds. In the base game, this bleeding damage is barely there because it doesn't scale with the character's level despite being supposed to, but if you have Dane's fixes, that's solved. Dual Weapon Mastery allows the character to use full-sized one-handed weapons in both hands. It also reduces the rogue's fatigue score by 2.5% when dual wielding, making all of their talents cost slightly less to activate. Rogues generally prefer to dual wield daggers for their faster attack speed. You can still wield a full-sized weapon in your main hand though, so you don't strictly need dual weapon mastery even for Sigrun, especially since you'll see that the best combination of weapons I recommend is a full weapon plus a dagger in the offhand. But you can also wield 2 full-size weapons if you want to, and I'll give you recommendations for that too, so for that purpose it's best to have dual weapon mastery unlocked to have the option to dual wield whatever you want. This strength build can take advantage of the higher base damage of longswords, axes, and maces, and the better attribute damage scaling they have over daggers. Plus, since Sigrun will be wearing heavy or massive armor pieces, her fatigue score will be higher, and it's always nice to get some fatigue reduction so you can use more of your strong damaging talents before you drink a stamina potion or wait for your stamina to recover. Dual striking is a sustained that causes the character to attack with both weapons at the same time, but they will be unable to inflict critical hits or backstabs. This is not useful at all for Sigrun because her build focuses on backstabs and also crits from talents, so you can remove it from your action bar entirely because you'll never use it. Riposte strikes a target once, dealing normal damage as well as stunning the target for a few seconds unless it passes a physical resistance check against the attacker's cunning. Then the character strikes with the other weapon, generating a crit if the target was stunned. This is only good if your character has high cunning to basically guarantee the stun against any enemy that isn't immune to stuns. However, since Sigrun's cunning is low in this build, I don't recommend using it at all. Dual Weapon Sweep deals damage in a cone in front of the character, striking enemies with one or both weapons and inflicting 50% more damage than normal. This is an ability that should always hit, but it can't crit. It's one of the best AoE damaging talents in the game because it's very cheap, only costs 20 stamina, and has a low cooldown, so it's always nice to have, although the fact that it can't crit makes this slightly less useful for Sigrun since you will have a large crit damage bonus. Still, her base damage will also be quite high due to wielding at least one high-tier full-sized weapon, so you can 100% use this. Flurry strikes a target 4 times very quickly, and each hit can be a critical. If you have a very high crit chance on Sigrun from passives and gear, then this can be very nice to deal a lot of damage to an enemy quickly. Even with a medium or lower crit chance, the simple fact that you're attacking faster than usual can be nice, but the possible crits are what really makes this great. Momentum is a sustain that increases the character's attack speed by 43% while imposing a -2 stamina regeneration penalty. This is an absolutely amazing talent that I always recommend every dual wielder uses, since faster attacks mean more damage. The -2 stamina regen penalty isn't a very big deal since you can easily get enough bonuses to comfortably offset it from gear, plus the 0.5 stamina regen you already get from one of the combat training skill ranks. You should absolutely always have this active on Sigrun. Finally, Sigrun also has the Legionnaire Scout specialization unlocked since she's part of the Legion of the Dead. The unlock bonuses for the Legionnaire Scout are +2 dexterity and +1 damage per hit, which are very good for any type of rogue. She has the first ability unlocked, Mark of the Legion, which is a passive that grants a huge +10 strength and +10 constitution, making the rogue both stronger and tankier. Sigrun's starting gear is decent, though some pieces need replacing ASAP. Ancient Dwarven Axe is a tier 7 war axe with 3 rune slots that has +1 damage and +1 AP. It's alright as far as starting weapons go, at least it has some bonuses, but you should replace it with something better as soon as you can. The axe you can repair during the main quest when you recruit Sigrun is a great early game choice. Scout's Dirk is a tier 7 basic dagger with 3 rune slots. Obviously, very bad because it doesn't have any bonuses. Any high tier weapon with actual bonus stats, whether a dagger or full weapon, is better. The Legionnaire armor set is a medium armor set comprised of a helm, chest piece, gloves, and boots. It's tier 7, the chest piece has 3 rune slots, and in total the bonuses are +15% cold resistance, +6 attack, +3 dexterity, +25 stamina, and -15% fire resistance. The set bonus from wearing all the pieces is +1.5 armor, which is basically nothing at all. The boots are the worst because they grant -15% fire resistance, so replace them immediately if you can. The gloves are decent for their +6 to attack, and the chest piece is also fine due to the dex and stamina bonuses, at least until you find better items. Don't worry about messing up the set bonus by replacing 1 or 2 of these armor pieces, because it's useless. Absolutely go ahead and give her something better. The only reason you would keep this set on Sigrun is for role-playing or challenge run purposes. Deep Road's Girdle is Sigrun's unique item that is restricted to her, a belt that grants +15% critical or backstab damage. This is actually a good unique companion item because one of the main stats Sigrun cares about with this build is crit or backstab damage. You could replace this with a belt that grants bonuses to all attributes, especially earlier in the game if you want to have the required strength faster for equipping heavy or massive armor pieces or higher tier weapons. But I recommend keeping this and switching back to it later once you have your strength requirements sorted, since it will give you more of a damage bonus than just 2 points of strength or so. Spirit Ward is an amulet that grants +10% spirit resistance. It's bad, replace it ASAP. Iced Band is a ring that grants +10% cold resistance. Also bad, replace it ASAP. Ring of Resistance is a ring that grants +1 willpower and +1 constitution. This is essentially just +5 stamina and health, so it's not great. More useful than the previous 2 accessories, but do replace it if you can. However, Awakening has a bit of a problem when it comes to rings for rogues, so you may not have something to give her unless you take the starting ring of another companion or have some good rings from DAO if you imported your Warden. Moving on to recommended attributes, what you need is very simple. The Flicker Rogue talent, which backstabs a bunch of enemies in quick succession, requires 52 dexterity to unlock, so that is the base dexterity score you should reach by level 26 when Flicker becomes available to unlock. Otherwise, most of your points should go into strength. You can put a few points into cunning until you reach a base score that allows you to unlock skills or abilities that require cunning, like stealing, the lockpick and disarm rogue talent, or stealth. Maxing out stealth and lockpicking requires 22 cunning. If you're not really interested in these or Sigrun already has the cunning she needs for them, then don't spend any extra points into cunning. You may also want to spend a few points into willpower in case you feel like you don't have a big enough stamina pool from gear bonuses to use the good damaging talents. Do keep in mind, however, that in Awakening you have access to stamina potions, so you don't have to rely on waiting for your stamina to regenerate, and you also don't need a large stamina pool anymore. You can also get more stamina from the Clarity skill, which grants plus 25 stamina per rank, so yeah, you don't really need to waste your points into willpower, but if you really want to put a few in, I recommend at most 5. Due to the plus 10 Constitution Sigrun already gets from Mark of the Legion, plus potentially other bonuses to Constitution from gear, she doesn't need any points spent on Constitution. She'll have a great health pool, plus you can increase your health further with the Vitality skill as well, which grants plus 25 health per rank. Finally, as an optional little thing, you could put 2 to 5 points into magic to increase the effectiveness of healing poultices on Sigrun, and I definitely recommend doing this if you are planning on playing without a mage that heals your allies, because the healing done by poultices scales with your character's spell power, which for non-mages only comes from their magic attribute. For recommended skills, Sigrun already has the most important ones, which are maxed out combat training and 1 rank of poison making. The only other skills I recommend working towards maxing out are Vitality and Clarity for the bonuses to health and stamina respectively. If you want to have a party member that crafts poisons, weapon coatings, and grenades, then you can of course unlock the higher ranks of poison making on Sigrun since she already has the first rank unlocked. If after you max out Vitality and Clarity you're still earning skill points, then you could spend them on Survival for some nature resistance or on Combat Tactics for extra tactic slots, though as a very simple backstab-focused rogue, Sigrun doesn't need many tactic slots. But let's get into the meat of this build with the recommended abilities. The main thing we're looking for here is a way to increase Sigrun's damage output, mainly for her backstabs, but also for her auto attacks. Since you will have a large bonus to critical or backstab damage, it's also a good idea to unlock a few activated talents that are automatic critical hits. They will also benefit from this crit damage bonus. You can use these auto crit talents on enemies that are immune to backstabs or which are in a position that makes them more difficult to backstab. From the rogue tree, you want to unlock combat movement and coup de grace as soon as possible. Combat movement is a passive that increases the flanking angle for the rogue from 120 to 180 degrees, meaning if you're attacking anywhere in their back half, you can backstab. The flanking bonus to attack is increased from plus 15 to plus 20, and you also get a plus 2% melee crit chance permanent bonus. This is super important for a backstab-focused melee rogue, so unlock this as one of your first abilities after you recruit Sigrun. You could definitely get this plus coup de grace for her instead of some of her worse starting abilities if you respecialize her. Coup de grace is another passive that causes the rogue to automatically backstab any enemy that is stunned or paralyzed, and it also adds a permanent plus 1% melee crit chance bonus. I believe frozen and petrified enemies also count as paralyzed, so it's not only enemies affected by the paralyze or mass paralysis spells or paralyze runes. Unlocking the 4 new Awakening rogue talents is also good, but it's not a high priority because the most important talent you're interested in is Flicker, and it requires level 26 to unlock. So you can wait until Sigrun is level 23 to start unlocking these. Heartseeker strikes an enemy dealing spirit damage instead of physical. Targets with less than 250 max HP will take spirit damage equal to their max HP, otherwise max critical damage is dealt. You may fail to kill targets with high spirit resistance, though there aren't too many of those. It's mainly just the Darkspawn disciples that you shouldn't use this on. but generally I'd recommend using this on a squishy but dangerous enemy, like a spellcaster, either normal, rank, or elite, or an elite rogue like an assassin type character. They should have fairly low HP and be able to take a huge amount of damage, likely being one-shot. Otherwise, if you've reduced enemy elemental resistances with a mage's hex-like vulnerability or affliction hex, then you can absolutely use Heartseeker to deal quite a significant amount of spirit damage to the affected enemy. Ghost grants the rogue a 100% dodge chance for 15 seconds. Any attack that requires an attack roll to hit will not connect. This is only good in some situations against enemies that can attack quickly, like rogue-type enemies. However, abilities like Overwhelm, Ram, and a few others don't require an attack roll and just hit, so against those, Ghost will do nothing. It's not the most amazing talent ever, but it's very nice for the purpose of keeping you safe from damage as long as it's coming from avoidable physical attacks. So in essence, this is just a nice defensive option to have in case things get hairy. Weak Points is a sustain that applies an on-hit effect to your equipped weapons, which increases the damage taken by the enemy or enemies you hit by 5% for the next 5 seconds. This doesn't stack with itself, so the bonus will always be just 5%, and frankly that's not a good enough bonus to justify keeping this active unless you have nothing better to spend your stamina on, which you do. This would pair well with talents that can hit multiple enemies at the same time and also apply on-hit effects like Whirlwind, Dual Weapon Sweep, or Scattershot. In the base game, I believe this ability actually doesn't do anything, but Dane's Fixes applies the proper 5% extra damage taken effect. Still, I don't recommend using it, and the only reason you want to unlock this is so that you can have access to the final ability in the row. Flicker is an activated talent that causes the rogue to quickly dash from one target to the next in a 7.5 meter sphere around themselves, backstabbing each target once. This is an amazing talent to have to take advantage of Sigrun's bonuses to crit and backstab damage, since she can deal a significant amount of damage to multiple enemies in a short amount of time. Obviously, this is best if you have a large group of enemies in the area, but even with just 3 or 4 enemies, this would be worth using as an AoE damaging talent that does backstabs. This talent doesn't seem to apply damage from socketed runes, so that's the only downside of the backstabs you're doing with Flicker. It does cost 80 stamina to use and has a 1-minute cooldown, so you'll likely only use it twice or so in a fight, but it's well worth it for the total amount of damage you can deal with it. If you want Sigrun to be able to unlock chests and doors and disarm traps, then be sure to unlock the passives in the Deft Hands tree, but those are not relevant for her combat capabilities, so I'm not including them in the build. I also don't consider stealth to be necessary for this build, but if you want to use it, then maxing it out is best, as I mentioned earlier when discussing Sigrun's starting abilities. This is so that you can easily re-enter stealth while in combat against most enemies, and then attack an enemy while stealthed for a guaranteed crit or backstab if you're in the right position. From the dual weapon tree, unlock Twin Strikes and Find Vitals. Low Blow and Unending Flurry may be lower priority depending on which variation of this build you use, but can be useful. Twin Strikes attacks an enemy twice with automatic critical hits. If you have the Find Vitals upgrade, then the target will also suffer bleeding damage equal to 2/3 of the initial damage over the next 5 seconds. The most important aspect of this talent though is the auto crit, since you'll get the extra crit damage bonuses you have from gear applied to its damage. If the enemy you're targeting is already under the effect of the low blow debuff, Twin Strikes will immobilize it without the enemy getting a resistance check for it, so that's a nice extra thing to do against a tankier enemy. Find Vitals is a passive that grants plus 10% melee crit chance and plus 20% critical damage while dual wielding. It also upgrades Twin Strikes to deal extra bleeding damage to the target. I would imagine that this bonus to critical damage is also applied to backstabs, but since the description of the talent doesn't mention backstabs, it may only apply to regular crits. Still, it's a good buff for your auto attacks to crit more often, and for all of your crits, whether from regular attacks or auto crit abilities, to deal more damage. Low Blow hits enemies in a sphere around the character with 5 strikes made in quick succession. It is possible to hit moving enemies multiple times, but also not at all, so it's kind of iffy. These hits slow the attack and movement speed of enemies by 30% for 5 seconds, and there's no resistance check for it. The hits can be critical as well. If one of the targets you're hitting is already affected by the bleeding from the upgraded Twin Strikes, then a hit from Low Blow will make it slip without allowing a resistance check. It's fine enough, but this isn't necessarily the best talent for a crit and backstab focused rogue since it doesn't guarantee crits. Still, since it's an AoE damaging ability, it's always useful to have if you have a lot of enemies around you that you want to kill faster. Unending Flurry is a very interesting sustained talent. It puts the character in a mode during which it continuously attacks an enemy very quickly, 3 times per second, which is even faster than dual-wielding daggers with max attack speed. Each strike will drain 20 stamina, and you need to deactivate this manually if you want to end it early, because otherwise it only deactivates if the target is dead or it runs away, or if you run out of stamina. Successful hits don't apply rune damage or weapon enchantment effects, but they can be critical. And furthermore, if the target is affected by the bleeding damage from twin strikes, each strike will be automatically a crit while the target is still bleeding. While you're in this mode, you can't be knocked down, knocked back, grabbed, overwhelmed, or incapacitated by Crushing Prison. Stun can be applied, but it won't end this attack. The best use for this is if you want to kill a single dangerous enemy very quickly and you don't think you could do it in 2 backstabs or crits, so these very fast attacks will get rid of it in less time than your other talents. I'd recommend using this against an elite mage or rogue, a tankier elite like an ogre because you'll be immune to its grab attack, or an enemy that can use Overwhelm since you'll also be immune to Overwhelm. If you pair it with Twin Strikes or another talent I'll discuss later that can guarantee you'll crit, this is also amazing against a boss. From her Legionnaire Scout specialization, the only ability I recommend unlocking is Strength of Stone. This will make Sigrun immune to damage and cause all of her physical resistance checks to succeed for the next 15 seconds. This means she will be immune to stuff like Overwhelm, but it can also be very useful when fighting a very strong enemy that deals a lot of damage. The second specialization I recommend you unlock for Sigrun is the Assassin. This is because you will be able to actually unlock the abilities and won't have to wait for a bunch of levels like you have to for the Shadow, which I recommend as your potential third specialization. The bonus you get from unlocking Assassin is +2 dexterity and +2.5% melee crit chance. Great bonuses for a melee rogue obviously, but the abilities are what you're interested in the most, and all 4 assassin abilities are good. Mark of Death causes the target to take 20% more damage for the next 20 seconds from all sources. This is an incredibly powerful ability to use on a high rank enemy like an elite or boss because it will make it much easier to kill. Every party member will benefit from this. Exploit Weakness is a passive that grants all your backstabs extra damage per hit based on your rogue's cunning score. However, this bonus damage is not very high, so Sigrun isn't missing out on much by investing into strength, especially because she gets to increase her damage further from wielding high-tier full-sized weapons and armor pieces that grant more strength. Still, do pick this passive up so that you can get the next ones. Lacerate is a passive that causes each backstab of the rogue to deal extra bleeding damage for the next 4 seconds. The backstab needs to deal at least 10 damage, but don't worry, you're doing a lot more than that. I believe that in the base game it's possible this bleeding damage isn't properly applied, but if you have Dane's fixes, that's resolved. Feast of the Fallen is a passive that restores the rogue's stamina whenever they kill an enemy with a backstab specifically. You'll get stamina equal to 5 times the enemy's level, which for Awakening is great because all the enemies are higher level, obviously. The fact that you need to kill them with a backstab is a bit annoying since it can be a bit difficult to always do it, but whenever you do, you'll get a good amount of stamina back, so it's great to have this ability for stamina regeneration purposes. This will help a lot with certain sustained abilities that have stamina regeneration penalties, since if you kill a lot of enemies with backstabs, you'll keep refreshing a huge chunk of your stamina, so the stamina drain won't be as bad. Plus, it means you have to drink less stamina potions as well. For your final specialization, I have 2 options. The first option is the Shadow. This specialization focuses on the rogue being stealthy and improves the damage of their backstabs quite significantly through the third ability. The bonuses you get from unlocking Shadow are +1 dexterity and +5 attack. These aren't as good as the unlock bonuses of the other 2, but the abilities are very nice. I recommend only unlocking the first 3 abilities because the last one isn't very good. It causes enemies to flee or attack a random target, which just isn't something useful enough unless maybe if you're doing a challenge run of some sort. Shadow Form is a sustain that reduces the threat of the rogue whenever they are attacked by an enemy. If you upgrade it with Shadow Striking, it will also grant +50% backstab damage while it's active, and that's really the main reason to use it. You have to be careful with it because it has a minus 10 stamina regeneration penalty. It's not easy to offset that penalty entirely, especially because you also want to have Momentum active, which has a minus 2 stamina regen penalty itself. However, with some bonuses to stamina regen from gear, the Feast of the Fallen passive from the Assassin specialization, and the addition of stamina potions, you should be able to keep the sustained once combat starts fairly easily. Do remember to turn it off when combat ends though, so that there aren't any issues with your stamina being low at the beginning of combat due to this. Don't bother using the basic version of Shadow Form though, only use the upgraded version once you unlock Shadow Striking. You can avoid attacks or damage with Strength of Stone and Ghost, as well as possibly Stealth if you have it, plus the next Shadow ability, so the threat reduction from Shadow Form isn't really important. Decoy is an activated talent that creates a decoy of the rogue with normal threat and attempts to put the rogue into stealth. The decoy has a 10-second duration and doesn't take damage. If Sigrun has the stealth ability, then the ability will be used automatically when the decoy is summoned, and all the regular stealth rules will apply. Due to this, it's best to have your stealth maxed out if you have it at all, or else entering stealth could fail if you only have 1 or 2 ranks of it. However, if you respecialize Sigrun and remove the point she has into stealth, then Decoy will apply its own special stealth effect that can't fail regardless of the ranks of nearby enemies, doesn't add any movement speed penalty to the rogue, and isn't broken by using abilities, attacking, or enemy perception. The only downsides of this special stealth effect are that it doesn't guarantee crits for basic attacks, and it only lasts 10 seconds like the decoy. If you aren't planning on using the regular stealth ability often in combat, I 100% recommend respecializing Sigrun to get rid of the 1 point she has in stealth, because this special decoy version of stealth is so much nicer to have access to when you're in danger and want enemies to stop attacking you. Finally, Shadow Striking is a passive that permanently adds plus 5% melee crit chance. It also upgrades Shadow Form with a plus 50% bonus to backstab damage while Shadow Form is active. This damage bonus is a separate modifier from the usual crit or backstab damage bonus, meaning that it will multiply your total backstab damage by 1.5 on top of all the other bonuses you have for your backstabs. So this is truly an amazing damage buff for Sigrun you can unlock at level 25 when this passive becomes available. I absolutely recommend unlocking this as soon as you can. Now, here's the thing. I know that the stamina regeneration penalty of Shadow Form may put some people off using it, and in that case, the only thing you'd get from the Shadow specialization is Decoy, which is nice to get out of danger, and the plus 5% melee crit chance from the Shadow Striking passive. For this reason, the Shadow specialization would be kind of useless, and there's a much better one to use instead: the Duelist. This specialization is focused on increasing your attack and defense, but it also has a potentially super powerful ability that guarantees all your attacks will be crits for 15 seconds, which is the main attraction. The bonuses you get for unlocking Duelist are plus 2 dexterity and plus 1 damage, which are nice for any rogue. Dueling is a sustain that grants the rogue plus 10 attack while it's active, and also plus 10 defense once it's upgraded with Keen Defense. This doesn't have any stamina regen penalty, so feel free to use it since it's just a nice little buff to make sure your attacks hit, and that you have a higher chance of avoiding enemy attacks once it's upgraded. Upset Balance is an activated talent that imposes a minus 20 defense and 20% movement speed penalty on the target, unless it passes a physical resistance check against the rogue's cunning. The duration is 10 seconds, but it's adjusted by enemy rank. This ability is kind of useless for Sigrun because her cunning is low, and so it's very likely the enemy will resist the effect, so I don't recommend using it. Keen Defense is a passive that upgrades the dueling sustain with plus 10 defense. It's a great upgrade for dueling, but the main reason you want to unlock it is because it gives you access to the final Duelist talent. Pinpoint Strike causes all of your Duelist's attacks to be automatic critical hits for the next 15 seconds. They will either be regular crits or backstabs if the attack counts as a backstab. You're either behind the enemy or the enemy is stunned or paralyzed, so coup de grace allows you to backstab them. This is amazing for Sigrun because she has bonuses to her crit damage and even more bonuses to her backstabs from the Assassin specialization. But a super interesting way to use this, other than to just guarantee crits, is to combine it with the Unending Flurry dual weapon sustained. If you activate Pinpoint Strike and then immediately activate Unending Flurry, You will guarantee that all of the very quick attacks you're doing against an enemy with Unending Flurry are crits for the next 14 or so seconds. That's huge because Unending Flurry attacks so quickly. So if you are going for this version of Sigrun's build with Duelist, then Unending Flurry becomes a high priority together with Pinpoint Strike. I would actually recommend unlocking Duelist before Assassin in this case, so you can use the Pinpoint Strike Unending Flurry combo earlier to melt through high rank enemies. This would be easiest to achieve if you respecialize Sigrun and get rid of some of the useless abilities she has, like Dual Striking, Riposte, and Stealth, and you could also delay getting Lethality or not get it at all, so you'd get 3 more points by getting rid of Below the Belt, Deadly Strike, and Lethality. These 6 total points can be used to get the 4 Duelist talents plus the first 2 new dual weapon talents from Awakening. If you want to have access to these 2 abilities straight away after respecializing Sigrun's starting abilities, then you can also get rid of the Dual Weapon Mastery passive and Dirty Fighting. These are both good abilities though, and you should get them back soon, especially Dual Weapon Mastery if you want to wield full-sized weapons in both hands. But you would have this extremely powerful combo right off the bat, which is worth it. I do in fact recommend respecializing Sigrun with a Tome of Focus or the Respecification mod, because you can just do a partial respec keeping her Legionnaire Scout specialization unlocked. Respecializing Sigrun will allow you to get rid of some of these useless abilities and have more talent points to play around with and unlock what you like to use most out of what I recommend. Plus, you'll also be able to put some points into the lockpicking and disarming talent if Sigrun is the only rogue in the party. Even if you don't respecialize her, you will be able to eventually unlock everything from the build if you reach around level 30 to 32, but with the respec you can get the build done earlier and easier. Moving on to the recommended gear. As part of recommending gear for Awakening characters, I'll only recommend the items you can obtain in Awakening. If you have a really good item from importing your Origins Warden, then by all means use it if it has good stats similar to what I recommend here. But I can't really recommend DAO items because you don't always import your Warden when you play Awakening, and even if you do, it's not guaranteed you'll have those items in your inventory. I'll explain briefly the main bonuses you want to have on your items. On weapons specifically, you want plus damage, critical backstab damage, potentially plus fire damage or another damage of a certain element added to each hit with that weapon, and finally, bonuses to crit chance and armor penetration are nice, but not as important. For your armor, the main offensive bonuses you can get are Strength to increase your damage with all weapons, Dexterity to increase your damage with daggers, crit or backstab damage, and armor penetration. For utility, stamina generation is helpful, especially if you want to get close to offsetting the -10 stamina regen penalty of Shadow Form. Bonuses to stamina or willpower are also nice, just to make your stamina pool larger, so it's more comfortable to use various talents and keep them sustained. And for defensive stats, bonuses to Constitution, Armor, Defense, and Dodge chance are the best. Constitution increases your health, Armor reduces physical damage taken, and Defense and Dodge chance make you more likely to avoid physical attacks entirely. Missile avoidance is also nice to avoid ranged attacks specifically, but defense factors into ranged defense as well, and dodge chance applies to both melee and ranged attacks, so missile deflection / missile avoidance / chance to avoid missile attacks is not as useful as the others. For accessories, you're looking for pretty much the same things as the other items, mostly offensive bonuses if you can get them. A bunch of accessories also have bonuses to all attributes, which are of course nice since they give you both strength and dexterity. Now that you understand generally what Sigrun's build needs, here are the items I personally recommend. For weapons, the best combination by far is the Reaper's Cudgel Mace and the Voice of Velvet Dagger. The Reaper's Cudgel is a tier 9 mace with 3 rune slots that grants +4 strength, +1 armor, +6 damage, +15% crit or backstab damage, and has a 10% chance to knock the target back. This is a DLC related item that you can have in your inventory from the beginning of the game if you kill the Harvester on Hard or Nightmare in the Golems of Amgarak DLC. The reason I recommend this mace as the best main full weapon is because maces have a huge armor penetration score, while usually having lower damage. However, this particular mace has a huge +6 damage bonus, which brings it in line with the other weapons with higher base damage, while also having much higher AP. It also increases your damage further with the strength and crit backstab damage bonuses, so it's just the best. Absolutely worth getting through the annoying and difficult golems of Amgarak. Voice of Velvet is a tier 9 dagger with 3 rune slots that grants +1 combat health regen, +3 damage, +5% melee crit chance, +25% dodge chance, a huge +100% crit or backstab damage, and +5 cold damage. You can buy this from the bartender at the Crown and Lion Tavern in Amaranthine. It's expensive, a bit over 174 gold, but worth every coin. That huge crit or backstab bonus will make Sigrun hit like a truck. However, you may not have the Reaper's Cudgel available and you'll have to save up some money before you can buy Voice of Velvet. So until then, or if you can't get these for whatever reason, here are the other good weapons for Sigrun. The second best dagger is Tooth of the Mountain Father, which is a tier 9 dagger with 3 rune slots that grants +1 damage, +2.5 AP, and +2 fire damage. It's also part of the Avar dagger set, but the set bonus isn't worth it and the other dagger is not good, so I only recommend using this one in the offhand if you want to use a dagger. Otherwise, use 2 full-sized weapons. The bartender at the Crown and Lion also sells the dagger Thorn of the Dead Gods for 2 gold and 4 silver. This is the same one as in Origins, the tier 6 version with 2 rune slots that grants +3 damage and +3 AP. If you want a cheap dagger to use on Sigrun or on another melee dual wielder early in the game, before you get Voice of Velvet or Tooth of the Mountain Father, then that one can be decent, but only temporarily, mainly due to the fact that it's tier 6, which means it has much lower base damage and AP, and 1 less rune slot, but it also doesn't have as many bonuses as the 2 good Awakening daggers. For full weapons, you do have more options, though do keep in mind the Reaper's Cudgel would be best in slot. Biteback Axe is a tier 6 war axe with 2 rune slots that grants +1.5 AP and +15% crit or backstab damage. It's rogue restricted and it has no strength requirements, so you could equip this early on Sigrun if her strength is not high enough for other weapons. You can buy it from Glassrick the Weaponsmith in Amaranthine for 3 gold and 24 silver. I personally wouldn't buy this because it's not as good as the other weapons, especially because you can get another axe for free that's better. Speaking of, Air Splitter is a tier 7 war axe with 3 rune slots that grants +2 damage, +4 attack, and +10% crit or backstab damage. You can obtain it by repairing the damaged axe at the Kal Haral Trade Quarterforge. You find and repair this during the quest when you recruit Sigrun, so this is the first weapon upgrade you can easily get for her. One of the reasons I like these war axes is that they have higher attribute damage scaling. However, the axes themselves aren't high tier enough and don't have enough bonuses to be able to compete with the Reaper's Cudgel or some very nice longswords, so I only recommend them early. If you have the tier 7 war axe, the Veshial from Origins, that one would be super nice here as an alternative to the Reaper's Cudgel if you don't have the mace. Out of the longswords, I recommend 3. Dumat's Spine is a tier 8 longsword with 3 rune slots that grants +0.75 combat stamina regen, +6 attack, and +25% crit or backstab damage. You easily obtain this by looting the weapon rack in the Vigil's Keep throne room after you complete the first mission, so you'll have it available for Sigrun or anyone else who would like it. It is part of a set with the Dumat's Claw dagger, but the dagger is unfortunately not good enough and the set bonus just grants immunity to flanking, which Sigrun frankly doesn't care about. So just use the sword on its own. Vigilance is a tier 9 longsword you can get Master Wade to craft for you at Vigil's Keep as part of the Worked to the Bone side quest, which you unlock after getting the Eldest Dragonbone item from defeating the Queen of the Black Marsh. You'll also need a few more items for Wade to craft this, but once you have them you can ask Wade to craft either a longsword or a greatsword, and you can further customize its stats by answering his questions. If you choose to craft the longsword, this would be a great option for Sigrun, but it could also be super useful for a dual wielding or weapon and shield warrior, so obviously you'll have to choose who gets to use it. Baseline, the longsword will be tier 9 with 3 rune slots and grant +1 to all attributes, +0.5 AP and +2 attack. The customization options I recommend are Raw Power for the first one, which grants an extra 1.5 AP and +5 fire damage, and I Want It As Sharp As Can Be for the second one, which grants +3% crit chance and +15% crit or backstab damage. In total, this version of Vigilance will have +1 to all attributes, +2 AP, +2 attack, +5 fire damage, +3% crit chance, and +15% crit or backstab damage. That's really powerful, especially the crit backstab damage, of course, but also the +5 fire damage per hit, which will be great against Darkspawn, which are the main enemy type you fight in Awakening because they're weak to fire. Finally, the last weapon I recommend is Blightblood, a tier 7 longsword with 3 rune slots that grants +5% melee crit chance, +6 attack, +15% crit or backstab damage, plus a poison effect that deals +5 nature damage per hit. It's restricted to warriors or rogues only for some reason, and it's a DLC related item that you can unlock and have in your inventory from the beginning of the game by completing the Darkspawn Chronicles DLC. I don't like this as much as the other two swords, especially due to the nature damage, which tends to be bad against a lot of enemies because many enemies are resistant or immune to nature damage. But it is a free weapon with decent stats, so it makes the cut. Moving on to armor, there is a distinct lack of medium armor options, which is my favorite armor type. In fact, Sigrun's starting armor is the only unique medium set in the game. I will say that the chest piece from the Legionnaire armor set is decent, tier 7 with 3 rune slots, granting +3 dexterity and +25 stamina. You can use it early in the game until Sigrun gets enough strength to equip the massive chest pieces I recommend. That's right, you heard me, massive chest pieces for Sigrun, who is a very strong Legionnaire scout, and we're making her even stronger by putting most of her attribute points into strength. The 3 best chest pieces for her are Clamshell Plate Armor, a tier 9 massive chest piece with 3 rune slots that grants +8 strength, +6 defense, +25 physical resistance, and missile avoidance. You can buy this from Haren at Vigil's Keep for a bit over 155 gold. If you have the money, it's absolutely worth it either for Sigrun or for one of your warriors. Golem Shell Armor is a tier 9 massive chest piece with 3 rune slots that grants +8 strength, +8 constitution, +2 armor, +25% fire resistance, and +20 physical resistance. This is another item that can be crafted by Master Wade at Vigil's Keep as part of the Golem's Might side quest if you bring him the Inferno Golem Shell you obtain as part of the main quest in Kal Haral, where you recruit Sigrun by defeating the Inferno Golem. You'll also need a few more ingredients. In particular, the hardest one to get is a Master Lyrium Potion, because you will need to craft it yourself. You can get all the ingredients from the apothecary in Amaranthine, but you need a party member with Master Herbalism, and also need to obtain the recipe for the Master Lyrium Potion from the Avar Deep Crypt in the basement of Vigil's Keep, which you will unlock after you find all 4 keys. It will take a little while to do that, since you have to explore the Deep Roads portion underneath the keep to get 3 of the keys. In any case, this is the best massive chest piece in the game, and any of your warriors would love it, but you can also use it on Sigrun. But if you want a chest piece that's completely free and easier to obtain, then I recommend Armor of the Sentinel. This is a tier 9 massive chest piece with 3 rune slots that grants +6 strength, +1 combat health regen, +20 physical resistance, and missile avoidance. You can loot this from the first after returning to the Black Marsh from the Black Marsh Undying during the main quest when you recruit Justice. This is also part of the Sentinel armor set, which you could use in its entirety because it has a very nice 15% fatigue reduction set bonus. But you can also use this chest piece on its own if you have certain helmets, gloves, and boots you want to use more than the Sentinel pieces. Finally, if you want to replace Sigrun's starting chest piece with something before you have the required strength for these massive chest pieces, then I can recommend 2 light chest pieces. Battle Dress of the Provocateur is a tier 9 light chest piece with 3 rune slots that grants +6 dexterity, +5 armor, +15 dodge chance, +1 combat stamina regen, and +50 stamina. This is a DLC related item that you can unlock by completing an achievement in the Liliana Song DLC. This would be a very nice and more importantly free upgrade over Sigrun's starting chest piece and will suit her well until you can equip the massive chest pieces. Shadow of the Empire is a tier 7 light chest piece that grants +2 strength, +2 dexterity, and +1 combat stamina regen. You can buy it from the bartender at the Crown and the Lion Tavern in Amaranthine for a bit over 15 gold. Personally, I wouldn't bother buying this because Sigrun's starting armor is just fine, and the battle dress is way better. But if you don't have the battle dress or aren't using DLC items at all, and maybe have another character in the party who may want this after Sigrun is done with it, it's fine. When it comes to helmets, unfortunately there's not a lot of good options. If you did import your Warden, here is the place where you would benefit the most out of having some good items imported along with you, like the Corruption Helm from the Battle of Denerim, or one of the other good helmets like the Free Scout Arming Cap. In any case, just try to find something that has decent stats, even if they're just defensive. You won't have much to work with. There's only 2 good options for helmets you can use for most of the game, and one helmet that's great, but unfortunately you only obtain it in the second to last main quest, and only if you choose to defend the keep. Blackblade Helm is a tier 9 light helmet that grants +4 willpower, plus 0.5 combat stamina regen, and plus 5% crit or backstab damage. You can obtain it from a secret room in the Silverite Mine. It's part of the Blackblade set, but in the vanilla game you can't obtain the full set unless you have a mod that fixes it. Helm of the Sentinel is a tier 9 massive helmet that grants plus 8 constitution, plus 0.5 combat health regen, and plus 9 defense. You can loot it from a chest in the Black Marsh. I don't recommend this helmet on its own because it's just defensive, but I wanted to mention it here so that you know what it's like if you want to use the full Sentinel set. If you aren't using the Sentinel set and are just using various different pieces, then the Blackblade Helm is what you should go for. Finally, Helm of Dragon's Peak is a tier 9 heavy helmet that grants plus 6 strength, plus 9 defense, and plus 0.5 combat stamina regen. You can loot it from the Armored Ogre Alpha during the Siege of Vigil's Keep main quest if you choose to defend Vigil's Keep. This is the best helmet on this list, but unfortunately you only get it in the second to last main quest, so you can only use it for the final main quest, which makes it far less useful overall. It would be a great upgrade over the Blackblade Helm for extra damage, while also keeping the bonus to stamina regen, so if you do get this and aren't using the Sentinel set, go ahead and equip it on Sigrun. For gloves, there are 3 good options and 1 decent one. Gauntlets of Herald's Defense are tier 8 massive gloves that grant plus 4 strength, plus 3% melee crit chance, and plus 1 AP. You can obtain them by solving the Runestone puzzle in the Kal Haral trade quarter during the main quest when you recruit Sigrun. They are part of a set, but the set bonus is not worth it, so only use these on their own. Gauntlets of the Sentinel are tier 9 massive gloves that grant plus 3% melee crit chance and plus 6 attack. You can loot these from a chest in the Black Marsh. These aren't as good on their own as the Haral gauntlets, so only use them if you're using the entire set, or if someone else is using the Haral gauntlets. Stormchaser gauntlets are tier 9 heavy gloves that grant plus 4 dexterity, plus 6 defense, plus 3 armor, plus 30% electricity resistance, and plus 2 combat stamina regen. You can buy these from Haren in the Vigil's Keep courtyard for a bit over 118 gold. They are part of the set, but the set bonus isn't worth it, and some of the other pieces in the set are bad as well. These are most useful for the stamina regeneration if you want to have a good amount to be able to more easily keep Shadow Form sustained. If you're not using Shadow Form, then you don't need these and can just use the Haral gauntlets or the Sentinel set. Finally, if you want to replace Sigrun's starting gloves but she doesn't have the strength to equip the first 3 yet, then I can also recommend Trickster's gloves. These are tier 8 light gloves that grant plus 3 dexterity and plus 4 attack, just slightly better than Sigrun's starting ones. You can loot these as part of the Law and Order side quest in Amaranthine if you side with the guards. For boots, there are 3 good options and 1 decent one. Boots of the Sentinel are tier 9 massive boots that grant plus 8 strength, plus 3 defense, and plus 5 physical resistance. You can loot these from a chest in the Black Marsh. I absolutely recommend using these for the huge strength bonus. Trickster's boots are tier 8 light boots that grant plus 20% electricity resistance and minus 10% fatigue. You can loot these from a skeleton in the Deep Roads area under Vigil's Keep. The reason I recommend these is if you aren't using the Sentinel set, because you can still reduce your fatigue by 10%, which is almost as good of a bonus as the set bonus from the Sentinel armor. Plus, the boots are light, and so they inherently also have much lower fatigue. They don't have any useful offensive stats though, so I still prefer the boots of the Sentinel over them. Finally, Fleet Feet are tier 9 heavy boots that grant plus 4 dexterity, plus 6 defense, plus 10% spell resistance, plus 10% dodge chance, and missile avoidance. You can buy them from the bartender at the Crown and the Lion Tavern in Amaranthine for a bit over 40 gold. They're very nice defensive boots, though I'd rather give them to a tank. I'll give you one more option for free boots in case you don't want to buy Fleet Feet or have them equipped on a tank. Storm Chaser boots are tier 8 heavy boots that grant +4 dexterity, +3 defense, and +5% electricity resistance. You can loot them during the side quest Far Afield. They're fine, but not nearly as good defensively as Fleet Feet, and not nearly as good offensively as the Sentinel boots. Still a decent option. Moving on to accessories, the list of good items to choose from is small because there's very slim pickings in Awakening, especially when it comes to belts and rings. For belts, there are 2 good belts other than Sigrun's unique belt, Deep Road's Girdle. I frankly recommend using the Deep Road's Girdle once you have enough strength to equip the weapons and armor you want, because it grants +15% crit or backstab damage, which is far better for Sigrun than just a small amount of extra strength and dexterity. But until you have enough strength to equip high-tier weapons and armor's baseline, one of these belts can help you equip items faster through bonuses to strength. Cinch of Skillful Maneuvering grants +2 to all attributes, +14% spell resistance, and +15% dodge chance. This is a DLC-related item that you can have in your inventory from the beginning of the game if you get an achievement in the Witch Hunt DLC. I prefer using this belt on a tank for the defensive stats, but it's good for the bonus to all attributes. Gladiator's Belt grants +2 strength, +2 dexterity, +2 willpower, and +4 attack. You can obtain this during the Tears in the Veil quest by completing the pillar puzzle in the Black Marsh Undying. When you return to the real Black Marsh, you can loot the runic pedestal to get this. This is essentially slightly worse than the Cinch, but it's a non-DLC item and it's free, plus it gives you bonuses to the most important attributes, strength and dexterity. For amulets, there are 4 good options. Illumination grants +3 to all attributes and +10 mental resistance. You can obtain it by solving the stone puzzle in the Wending Wood. Seeker's Chain grants +2 to all attributes, +1 combat health regen, and +3 defense. You can buy it from Glassrick the Weaponsmith in Amaranthine for 10 gold and a half. Pearl of the Anointed grants +2 to all attributes and increased monetary gain. The monetary gain doesn't matter, the attribute bonus is what's good here. This is a promo DLC item you should have in your inventory from the beginning of the game. Finally, the High Regard of House Dace grants +6 cunning, +7% melee crit chance, +1 combat stamina regen, +50 stamina, and +30 missile avoidance. This is a DLC-related item you can unlock and have available in your inventory from the beginning of the game if you get an achievement in the Golems of Amgarak DLC. Usually, I'd prefer this on a cunning-based rogue, but this can be good on Sigrun for the melee crit chance, stamina, and stamina regen bonuses. The cunning will also improve her exploit weakness damage added to her backstabs, as well as give her a tiny bit of extra armor penetration, so it's certainly not useless. Certainly, if she's the only melee rogue you're using, then you might as well give this to her if you have it. Finally, for rings, there are only 3 good options. Corrin's Proposal grants +2 to all attributes. It's a reward for the side quest The Trail of Love in the Black Marsh. Dawn Ring grants +4 strength and -1 cunning, and it's one of Justice's starting rings. So you can steal it from him and give it to Sigrun to increase her strength for both damage and weapon and armor equipping purposes. If you imported your Warden from Origins, you may also have this ring if you saved the alienage during the final battle, so you could use 2 of these rings for a huge total +8 to strength. Finally, Ring of the Warrior grants +2 strength and +2 dexterity, and it's one of the starting rings for Ogryn, as well as a warrior or rogue or legion warden commander. You may also have one of these in your inventory if you imported your own warden from Origins and got the ring from the Drifter's Cache side quest in the Deep Roads. The only other ring from Origins that would be really nice would be the Key to the City because of its +2 to all attributes, but you do also have Corrin's Proposal for that, and the Dawn's Ring +4 strength is very attractive. Moving on to runes, there are some very nice ones that can augment Sigrun's build, both in terms of weapon runes and armor runes. Keep in mind that in Awakening you will have to craft your own runes with the rune crafting skill. No merchant sells higher tier runes, only novice runes which you can use as ingredients to craft high tier ones. If you have some good weapon runes in your inventory when you import your Warden from Origins, Obviously you can use those, but otherwise you'll need to craft them in Awakening. And you'll definitely need to craft the hybrid weapon runes and any armor runes because they are exclusive to Awakening. The best weapon runes to have are high tier paralyze runes, 1 in each weapon, so that you have a chance to paralyze enemies with each hit. This way, you'll be able to backstab them a lot easier by paralyzing them if you have the coup de grace rogue passive. Fire, lightning, or silverite runes, also 1 in each weapon, so that you deal extra damage either fire or lightning if you want for the damage to be good against multiple enemy types, or fire or silverite if you want to do a lot of damage to Darkspawn specifically. Darkspawn are weak to fire, but silverite runes have a higher damage number, so they may be more effective. However, if you want your extra damage to be useful against literally all enemies, choose lightning, because no enemy is immune to lightning, and very few have lightning resistance. I do have one note about the silverite runes: don't try to make them at Masterpiece or Paragon level, because there is a bug that flags them as armor runes, and obviously the extra damage will not trigger if you insert a silverite rune into an armor rune slot. The final weapon runes that are useful are intensifying runes. These are hybrid runes and are more difficult to craft, so if you don't want to put in that much effort, just go with 1 paralyze rune and 2 out of fire, lightning, and silverite in each weapon. If you do decide to craft intensifying runes, then I recommend 1 in each weapon or more. They increase your crit chance by 5% and your crit and backstab damage by 20%. If you realize you're already close to the maximum crit or backstab bonus you can get from gear or other sources, which is plus 200%, then you obviously don't need to use intensifying runes anymore. But if you are under that 200%, an intensifying rune will increase your damage a lot more than the fire, lightning, or silverite runes. For armor runes, the best one I recommend for this particular massive armor wearing build is the Endurance rune, because it grants a 5% fatigue reduction, and so if you have 3 Endurance runes in your massive chest piece, that will be a very significant 15% fatigue reduction, which will help keep your stamina costs for talents at a decent level. Endurance runes are also hybrid runes, so they're a bit more complicated to make, but for this build I do think they're worth it. If you want to go for something simpler, you could craft Reservoir runes to give Sigrun more willpower, aka more stamina, or Stout runes to give her more constitution, aka health. I'd go more for the Reservoir runes for the stamina, because she already gets a large amount of constitution bonuses from gear, and also that plus 10 from her Mark of the Legion passive. I will also briefly talk about poisons and weapon coatings that you can craft with poison making, or also buy from merchants, since Sigrun has a rank of poison making, and so she's able to coat her weapons with these consumables. The best poison by far to use on this build is one that has a chance to stun enemies per hit. These are Deathroot and Concentrated Deathroot Extract, Crow Poison and Concentrated Crow Poison, and Flesh Rot. Obviously you may already have a chance to stun if you're using Paralyze runes in Sigrun's weapons, but an extra chance to stun is never bad to ensure you can easily backstab enemies. If you just want to use a poison or coating that deals extra damage without additional effects, then the ones that deal fire, electricity, or spirit damage are the best. Fire damage because Darkspawn and Undead are weak to it, electricity and spirit damage because no enemies are immune to these 2 elements, and very few are resistant to them, the Darkspawn disciples in Awakening being the only ones that have a very high spirit resistance. If you want to use grenades, they're all very nice because they have high base damage. However, the fire bomb tends to be great due to what I've already said about fire weakness. Shock bombs can be nice because electricity damage drains the stamina of warrior and rogue enemies, plus very few enemies are resistant to it. And soul rot bombs are good because other than the disciples, no enemies have high spirit resistance. I will also mention that the new elemental grenade added in Awakening is good. It deals 30 points of each element, and while nature sucks and cold isn't great, the fact that it deals 30 damage each of fire, electricity, and spirit makes up for it. It does need master poison making to craft, but you can get the recipe for free from a book pile inside the Crown and the Lion Tavern in Amaranthine, and the ingredients aren't that expensive. 1 flask, 1 blood lotus, 2 corruptor agents, and 1 concentrator agent. If you are planning on doing a no mage run, then the dispel grenades could be very useful because when you throw them, they dispel all magical effects in a small area, so you can dispel any nasty effects on your party members with this. It also requires master poison making. The recipe is in a locked chest at the Black Marsh docks, and the ingredients required are 1 flask, 1 rash vine nettle, 2 corruptor agents, and 1 concentrator agent. Finally, let's talk about tactics and party composition. In terms of party composition, I always recommend having 1 proper tank in the party, at least 1 ranged character, whether an archer or a mage, but I do also recommend having a mage because they make combat a lot more comfortable. By tank, I mean a warrior who can use Threaten and Taunt, and in Awakening, Grievous Insult for the purpose of keeping enemies attacking them instead of their squishier party members. At least 1 ranged character, or maybe 2 is good, both because you can start dealing damage to enemies that are farther away earlier, but also because if you have 3 or 4 melee characters in your party, they can end up getting stuck in doorways and cramped spaces when engaging with enemies, and that is both awkward and causes you to take more time to kill those enemies. I always recommend having a mage in your party unless you're doing a no mage playthrough, because they can heal your party, buff them with spells like haste or weapon enchantments, and of course, disable enemies or deal tons of damage to them with offensive spells. Since Sigrun is a melee damager, with her it would be nice to have a ranged damager, archer or ranged mage specifically, just so that your damagers aren't solely melee. But you could of course add a second melee damager, perhaps a 2-handed warrior, if you choose the ranged character to be a mage. That's really all the advice I have for party compositions, because I think that first and foremost, it's important to choose the party that you feel comfortable playing, and which includes the companions you like. So my suggestions are just that, suggestions based on my experience and playstyle preferences. For Sigrun's tactics, backstab rogues have a fairly simple playstyle, which mostly involves either positioning behind enemies to backstab them, or else trying to ensure that enemies become stunned, paralyzed, petrified, or frozen, so that the rogue gets to backstab them while incapacitated in that way due to the coup de grace passive. As I mentioned in the introduction, I really recommend having the advanced tactics mod so that you can enable the option for melee rogues to seek to attack enemies from behind. That makes this build a lot easier to use without manually controlling the melee rogue, because without it you'll have to ensure that all or at least most of your party members have various abilities that can incapacitate enemies, so Sigrun does automatic backstabs on them without needing to be behind them when she attacks. So the main thing Sigrun wants to do most of the time is backstab enemies. However, sometimes this won't be possible because some enemies are immune to flanking, they may also be immune to stuns and other physical effects. This will in particular apply to bosses, but certain elite tanky enemies may also have some of these immunities. In that case, or if an enemy is positioned awkwardly and you just can't find a way to go behind them to backstab them, then Sigrun should use one of her strong damaging talents. Against a single enemy, the best type of talent to use is something that causes an automatic critical hit, or otherwise does multiple attacks in a short amount of time, and against a group of enemies, the best talents are the ones that have an area of effect, so that you can of course deal damage to multiple enemies at once. You should keep your momentum sustained active at all times. It increases your attack speed by 43%, so all your damage is increased due to this. If you chose the Shadow specialization for the build, then the upgraded Shadow form sustained should be turned on at the start of combat and turned off when combat ends because it has a huge stamina drain. To manage Sigrun's stamina, you'll likely have to make Sigrun drink stamina potions during combat if combat lasts too long, so that she doesn't run out of stamina. If she gets to 0 stamina, all her sustained abilities will turn off and go on a cooldown period, which is very annoying. I'd make her use a stamina potion when she's under 20% stamina or maybe under 30%. And it can be of any quality, though the lesser ones are the cheapest to either buy or craft, and that's what I prefer using. Another way to keep Sigrun's stamina from draining is to have a mage cast the Rejuvenate spell on her. It will increase her stamina regen by +8, which is very close to offsetting the -10 stamina regen penalty of Shadow form. With a bit of extra stamina regen bonuses on gear, you can completely negate the penalty. However, Rejuvenate only lasts for 10 seconds, so you'll have to cast it pretty often on her if you go this route. Mass Rejuvenation does also work, but it only grants +5 mana or stamina regen, though it's for the entire party. So keep these spells in mind if you have a more support-focused mage. Especially in shorter fights, you may not need to use any stamina drafts at all if you cast Rejuvenate a few times on Sigrun. If you chose the Duelist specialization instead of Shadow, you can easily keep the Dueling Sustained active at all times because it doesn't have any stamina drain. It will give you a bonus to attack plus defense after you upgrade it. You won't get the huge plus 50% damage buff to your total backstab damage that you can get from the upgraded Shadow form, but it is a lot easier to play the Duelist version because you don't need to worry about stamina at all. Plus, you will get the Pinpoint Strike ability, which you can use in an absolutely devastating combo with Unending Flurry. Against a single target, first off, if you aren't backstabbing them, try to use Dirty Fighting to stun them so that you can backstab them. Or else see if one of your other party members can use a spell or talent that incapacitates them for coup de grace to activate and turn your attacks into automatic backstabs. If you still can't backstab the enemy, then use Twin Strikes, Flurry, or potentially Heartseeker. Twin Strikes has 2 attacks that are automatic crits, Flurry has 4 quick attacks that can be crits, so use it if your crit chance is high. Heartseeker deals spirit damage, and it does a huge amount of damage to enemies that have a low health pool. Against an enemy that has very high health and likely high resistances, the best thing you can use is the Assassin talent Mark of Death, which increases all the damage that an enemy takes by 20% for the next 20 seconds. Afterwards, try to use backstabs if possible, Twin Strikes, and maybe Flurry. And the best combo by far that you can use to deal a crap ton of damage to a boss enemy is if you choose the Duelist version of this build by combining Pinpoint Strike, which causes all your attacks to be critical hits for the next 15 seconds, and Unending Flurry, which continuously attacks an enemy extremely quickly for as long as you have the stamina or until the enemy dies or runs away. I really like this combo against bosses that are unlikely to move away from you. Anyway, due to the huge amount of damage Sigrun is dealing with this combo, they will probably attack her, so because of that, it may also be a great idea to use either Ghost or Strength of Stone before the combo to protect yourself. Against a group of enemies, you have 3 good area of effect talents. Dual Weapon Sweep, dealing damage to enemies in a cone in front of you, Low Blow, which deals damage to enemies all around you, and Flicker, which is the best AoE damaging talent for Sigrun's build because it deals a backstab attack to each enemy in a quite large 7.5 meter radius around her. Finally, other than activating Ghost or Strength of Stone manually when you think Sigrun might be in danger, or to preventively use it before she's about to deal a huge amount of damage, you could also set it in her tactics to use these abilities in certain situations. I would, for example, set up Ghost to be used when Sigrun is surrounded by at least 3 enemies, because it's very likely those enemies are attacking her with melee attacks, so the 100% dodge chance will help her out a lot. As for Strength of Stone, I would make her use it when she is below 50 or 60% HP. If you're playing on Hard or Nightmare, under 60% HP is better, because enemies like to use their super dangerous abilities against characters that are under a certain HP threshold. I would also, of course, set for Sigrun to drink a health poultice when she is under 50 or 60% HP if you're playing on Hard or especially Nightmare. If you have a mage who can cast both heal and group heal in the party, and you have their healing spell set up nicely in their tactics, then maybe you don't need to make Sigrun always use a health poultice in this situation, but it's good to be safer with her because she will likely be the character in your party who is dealing the most amount of damage. If she's knocked unconscious, a large portion of your team's damage is gone, and you may not be able to win the fight anymore. If you're using Shadow form, I've already mentioned this, but I'll say it again, the best thing you can do is tell Sigrun to drink a stamina potion when she is under 20 or 30% stamina, unless you have a support mage who can cast Rejuvenate pretty frequently on her. But that's about it. These are all the abilities that are useful for Sigrun because her regular backstabs are her biggest strength. You won't be using these other activated talents super often, only in the situations when they are better than backstabs or where backstabs aren't possible. In conclusion, I think Sigrun is a very interesting type of rogue that caused me to find a way to build a strength-focused rogue that is really fun to play. As I said, she's my favorite companion in Awakening, so I wanted her build to feel unique and, more importantly, fit her more aggressive nature. And I think I managed to do that with this pretty weird but surprisingly powerful build. This super backstab and strength-focused build wouldn't work as well in Origins because Awakening adds some very nice new abilities, plus gear like the Voice of Velvet dagger with that huge plus 100% crit or backstab damage bonus, and the weapon runes that also add crit chance and crit backstab damage. These new things allow the backstabs of rogues to truly shine in a way that they just can't in DAO. And I think this is exactly the main strength and appeal of Awakening, making these new and funky builds possible and fun to play around with. Because otherwise the main story feels fairly rushed, especially towards the end. You don't get as many interactions with your companions, there's no romance and so on, and I do think it's a damn shame we didn't get to romance Sigrun. Anyway, I hope you found this build guide for Sigrun in Dragon Age Origins Awakening useful. If you enjoyed this, stick around for future guides and other videos I plan to make about Awakening, Dragon Age in general, and other games I care about. At this moment, I'm mainly focused on the Awakening guides, but of course a lot more than that is coming in due time. Feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe, or maybe become a channel member. Everything helps. This has been B Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.